Now, moderating our first panel is a very dear friend of ours, Dr. Nicol Turner-Lee, as well as being the director of the Center for Technology Innovation at the Brookings Institute. She's also the author of a remarkable new book, Digitally Invisible, How the Internet is Creating the New Underclass. We at FOSI bought multiple copies, and I strongly recommend that you do the same. So please welcome Nicol and her panelists to the stage. Go kill him. Well done. Good luck.
Good morning, FOSI. Okay, I know you all have had your coffee. Good morning, everybody. Well, we are excited to have this panel, particularly following the briefing on the report. And I am excited to be joined by 3 experts who will dive a little bit deeper into the report based on their experiences. I figured I'm going to let them all introduce themselves. That way they can talk a little bit more about their bios, which is in your materials. But let's just start, Emily, with you. Like, what is your reaction? Actually, let me go to Jen first. You know, I was looking at Emily, but I really want to go to you, Jen. Let's start with your reaction to the report and tell people a little bit more about yourself.
Okay. Hi, I'm Jen Kotler, and I oversee the research, content strategy, and writing teams on the kids and family team at Google. And I've been in this field for over 30 years. I'm a developmental scientist, and my dissertation in the 90s was on parental supervision of children's television use. And so this is 30 years later, basically.
I know.
Coming back to these kinds of issues have been going on for a very, very long time. And the conversation is very similar, even though the technology has changed. But what hasn't changed are that kids' needs haven't changed. And what kids and teens need from technology, from their parents, from all the organizations that serve them are the same important needs. So I think, hearing sort of both the balance of the positive and the negatives from this study are really important. And I think that one of the things that just strikes me as someone who spends a lot of my time looking at the academic literature, looking at the popular press, looking at what people are saying about youth today and interviewing a lot of young people today, is that digital well-being or digital aspects of their lives is just a piece of a larger puzzle. And I think that is not what is often seen in these big headlines about digital media taking over childhood, taking over adolescence. And I think that it is a piece of well-being, and it is a piece of their whole entire life that is informs their well-being. It is not first and foremost what their concerns are and what they think about, but it can really enhance their life as well, and it can also be a part of something that needs a little bit of work. So I think just seeing how digital well-being fits into this puzzle is sort of like interesting to say that isn't the first and foremost of what's on their mind. That's one. 2, this idea that teens think that their well-being is more their responsibility than their parents or anybody else, I think just shows how much that solutions that really only focus on what parents can do, what tech companies should do, what government should do, really takes away that agency from young people. And anything that doesn't take their needs into consideration and their voices and their opinions and their thoughts is not going to end well for anyone, given that they are getting so much good stuff out of it as well. Certainly we need protections, baseline protections, and we need the other people in their lives to be doing well. But just this agency that sometimes we talk about what we can and can't do for them without considering them is an issue. I think also the final thing I'd say is the fact that this interest in more tools that we can develop to help them manage aspects of their well-being in the digital world. And I think that is something we're always thinking about, and I know at Google we think about that a lot, about ways to really enhance the good and have the baseline protections as well.
And I like that. I mean, I've been coming to FOSI for a really long time, so I really appreciate that this is really not like a formative thing, right? This is really part of the composite existence of young people. So we'll probably come back to that. Amanda,
Yes.
how about your reaction to the report? What was your reaction? Also, let the people know who you are and what you do.
Thanks, Nicole. Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda Ferguson. I'm a clinical psychologist and also a senior researcher at the University of Cambridge, where I study digital technology use and how it affects the trajectory of mental health for young people. So the lens that I take in my research is really one of mechanisms, and what I mean by that is that I'm less interested in the question of if digital tech impacts well-being, and I'm much more interested in the how. As a teaser perhaps for later, the if question is more or less answered. We know that it can, very minimally and in both directions, but the how question is a lot more fuzzy. And so the thing that I found most compelling about this report was that a lot of the questions asked to parents and teens looked through this how lens. So for example, we didn't just learn, if teens experience positive and negative things online, we actually learned detailed information about the nature of those experiences. And I think perhaps most importantly, the results suggested that people have varied experiences. So there wasn't just, of those top 3 ranked choices, there wasn't just 3 or 4, there were 13 or 14 or something like that. And so I think that really mirrors back what we know from the research on this topic, which is that a teen's relationship with their digital life or their device is incredibly nuanced. It's really complex. It can't be reduced down to something like screen time, and no 2 teens will respond to the same content in the same way. So I think, I feel quite hopeful about this report in the sense that if as a field, and ideally maybe as a broader culture, we can start embracing this reality of these relationships with our digital lives being very nuanced, we can hopefully start understanding a little bit more about that how question. Why is it that some kids do really well online, most kids do pretty well online, and some kids really don't? So looking forward to talking more.
No, it's interesting, and we'll come back to that because I do have a question on, like you said, this how, because it's very nuanced, like you said, versus prior iterations of this report and research, where we're finding a lot more out. Now I'm coming to you. Emily, tell me more about your reaction and let people know what you do as well.
Okay, good morning. I'm Emily Weinstein. I'm a researcher at Harvard Graduate School of Education, where I co-founded the Center for Digital Thriving, and I also, with Carrie James, wrote the book Behind Their Screens, What Teens Are Facing and Adults Are Missing. One of the things that really stood out to me when we last week saw the first version of this report a couple of days in advance was that in the question to teens about the risks around online life that are most salient for them and the threats to digital well-being that stood out most to them, there's a lot of variation. So there are a lot of areas in the report where we see some consensus, but this is an area where we see actually, once again, teens are not a monolith, and the concerns that they have are different. And I think that these survey data are really an invitation to us to get curious about what different teens are experiencing and how we move beyond just looking at a bar graph and saying, okay, 24% or 64%, and try and really understand what is going on there. One of the areas that rose higher up on that list was around scams and frauds.
Right.
And we had a conversation about that during our prep call, and then I reached out. We have a youth advisory board. One of them is run through in tandem, and I reached out to them and I asked some of the teens on our advisory board, does this seem right to you, scams and frauds? Some of the researchers were surprised by this, and what comes to mind when you think about scams and frauds? And so I got a bunch of responses, and one of the things that they said was, this seems right. This doesn't surprise me. And they said, it's just getting harder and harder. This is it feels like there are scams around purchasing that I'm really worried about falling for. The bots are just getting better and better. And I feel like I don't even know what I don't know. I'm worried about being blackmailed. I'm worried about risks to private information. So I was really thinking about their responses alongside the appetite we see in this report for default privacy privacy settings for personal information. And I think that there is really a there for teens. And so holding where are teens sort of gravitating in terms of their concerns, and what do they mean by that? What's coming to mind for them? What do they really want our attention focused on? And also really creating space for the variation across teens' very different experiences and family circumstances and contexts, and recognizing, of course, that we know from so much research that teens are having really different experiences with tech, and that if we are ignoring or glossing over that, we will continue to create the wrong interventions, or interventions that miss the mark.
That's right. You know, it's so funny that you bring it up. As Stephen mentioned, I'm an author of a new book, Digitally Invisible. Available to bookstore near you. But I was actually at a middle school in the Bronx, and when you talked about going back to your young people, and I thought about the report, one of the kids had figured out how to track down bots. And, you know, to your point, when we think that young people have a very, you know, short tail when it comes to understanding their privacy or cyber or scams, they actually know a lot more than we think. And that particular young person, my research deals a lot with marginalized youth. I found it to be quite interesting, right? That the translation of this digital life, it actually goes wherever young people are. It's not something that is just trapped by the privilege anymore, because we have done a much better job in making people more digitally visible. You know, and this brings me, Jen, to this question about the research in the paper is not only about the United States, right? It is about other countries and their digital life of teens. And I'm thinking about, I wrote this down, the percentage in Brazil was at 80% compared to the 62% use in the US, and just under 50% in Germany. What do we know from this report about what these conversations look like? Because I think we tend to stay in our own box when we sort of look at these findings. And what would be your recommendations to parents to enhance those types of conversations? Because you know, at FOSI, we're international. So just curious to go a little bit deeper into that.
Right. What's interesting, I think these conversations vary
Yes.
about, you know, across country, within country, depending on the parents' concerns, the teens' concerns. I think what's fascinating, and if you haven't read it, check out the Save the Children report that Amanda Third led the research for, where these conversations that teens tend to have with their parents, when something bad happens, the parents tend to react in a way like, well, then shut it down. I'm taking this away from you. I'm not letting you do this anymore. Instead of saying, okay, this bad thing might have happened. Let's see how next time you might feel more comfortable stopping it, or I'm so glad you came to me. Instead of, I think some of it, these conversations are reactive and probably pretty negative. Like, you're on your phone too much. You're doing this too much. I don't like the look of that. This or that. And so I am thinking that a lot of the times when young people do talk with their parents about either something that concerned them or something they saw, that these conversations turn into that overprotection, taking away agency. And I think there's a lot more that, and we know from a lot of literature about parenting, that in fact, being open to problem solving together, giving control, and some really understanding what that young person might need, we need to be really fostering those kinds of conversations rather than, okay, stop, we'll get off of it, next time, don't do that.
Well, that's interesting, right? Because I want to go back over here, Emily, on this whole analogy. I mean, Stephen writes in the beginning that we're starting to equate big tech to big tobacco. Now, I don't know how many of you in this room remember the big tobacco campaign, and, we see a little bit of this and some of the warnings that are coming out, and to Jen, your point, right, where people are saying, shut it down, or ban it. I mean, I'm just curious if that paradigm even fits what we're talking about today, particularly since the digital lives of young people are quite autonomous. They have some agency, and I'm sure, and we see a little bit of this in the report, that parents also grow alongside this digital life. So it's not something that's just happening by itself. So talk to me a little bit about your reaction to that analogy.
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. I think two things are true here. So one is that's a lazy metaphor, and it closes and shuts off a lot of conversations we need to be having as we imagine the solutions and interventions that we need. And it's resonated with a lot of the public, I think, for reasons that we have to engage with and we have to pay attention to in this conversation. So if we want different kinds of metaphors and different kinds of conversations, I think we have to acknowledge that a reason that the big tobacco metaphor has taken hold so strongly is because people have seen too many examples of design features that prioritize attention over agency and focus on maximizing time spent by a young person without really any care for what that time has actually meant for a young person. And if we want to encourage people to embrace these more nuanced conversations, I think we have to meet that head on. We have to recognize that that's part of the fear, that's part of the stress. And I think this connects to what Jen was saying, because the reality is that this is really hard for parents. This is really stressful. I'm a parent, I have 2 kids, I study this, I think about it all day long, and it is still so hard in my own parenting because we are literally chasing a moving target. The technologies continue to change so fast, and we have the reality that in this report, we see that parents are feeling very responsible for guiding their kids around these topics, and kids are recognizing that their home lives, their families play an important role. But there is not a clear guidebook on which conversations to have with our kids or exactly what digital well-being even means. And we hear parents who are saying things like, I don't know what guidance to give my kid about group chats. I never had a group chat, and I don't even understand what SnapMap is, and now I have my teen so upset on a Friday night because they just realized that their friends are hanging out. Do I need to get them off Snapchat? Do I need to have a different kind of conversation? And I think in those moments, you started by asking about what guidance we might have for parents. And I think we for sure we all need to help parents with the chase of this target. We need to make that chase easier and less exhausting through resources and supports. And I think that there is a lot of power in also helping parents embrace the mindset that there is a lot familiar here, even when the form it's taking feels really new and different. So maybe you never found out you were left out on Instagram or through Venmo even, but you probably know what it feels like to feel left out.
Yes.
And maybe you can actually remember what it felt like to be 15 or 16 and really care about what your friends thought about what you were wearing, even if it was totally not something your parents wanted you to wear. And these are familiar experiences, and I think when we help parents move beyond this is also new and scary, and they can tap into what's familiar, they fall into empathy. And that changes the entire tone of the conversations they will have after. And it also gives them a source of genuine wisdom and expertise that they can draw on in a context where I think so much change and so many scary headlines have made parents feel like there is just nothing I know, and I'm so out of my depths here.
Yeah, I mean, you're speaking to me, so I'm gonna be one of those people that says, ouch. You know what I tell my kids when I want them to get offline? When I was younger, I used to stay out until the street lights came on. And it doesn't work anymore because of the street lights come on a little earlier in our neighborhood. So it doesn't work quite so much. But this gets me to this whole conversation, though. I think part of the other reason that people get concerned, and the report talks a little about it, is because of the mental health of kids, right? And I remember my daughter telling me during the pandemic, if it had not been for social media, she would have felt more lonely. And so I want you, Amanda, to kind of come in and chime into this conversation. There really is a tension, right? But some of that narrative is driven around whether or not teens' mental health is actually also safe and secure. And I want to just quickly tell all of you, we're going to actually move to Q&A. So if you've got some questions percolating in your mind, in about 7 or 8 minutes, we're going to open it up to the audience. We've got some mics floating around because we want to hear from you as well.
Yes, thanks, Nicole. So there absolutely are positive health benefits or mental health benefits to being online. For example, over the pandemic, there was this lovely study run where it looked at digitally connected kids versus those who were not in the global north, and during the sort of lockdown era of the pandemic. And those who were digitally connected, who had easy access to their peers through technology, fared better. They did better, which makes so much sense, of course. And of course, there are risks. We do know that there are populations who are at higher risk for negative outcomes subsequent to all stressors, including stressors that can be experienced online. So I do think it's important to acknowledge that this report because it's a population level survey, we're trying to get a sense of the average person. And when we get a sense of the average person, what they are experiencing, what they're willing to report, we lose the people at the edges, just as a function of statistics. And so there is this group of people who are not the average. They're doing worse than average. They're maybe quite a bit worse than average in terms of their mental health. And I think we have good reason to think that they might respond differently to some of these questions. But we don't have that data, but it's possible based on what we know so far. For example, we know that not only do kids who have a little bit worse mental health use a bit more, something like social media, they tend to be online a little bit more. They also tend to engage with content differently. So it's actually not just about them being there more or them seeing specific things. It's about the psychological and internal processes that they bend towards more often. Right. That are some of these kind of mechanisms that might impact mental health outcomes negatively. So yeah, I think additional research is just always needed.
Yeah, because this wasn't a clinical study, right? No. So, for folks who are going to read the report, this is basically not necessarily, it's empirical research, but not necessarily clinical research. But that really does beg the question of how much more clinical research, because I like the way you frame it. It's really people are coming in with some pre-existing issues that we have to address.
And if I could just add to that, this is not just this is a very common issue. This systematic review that came out of my group at Cambridge recently looked at the proportion of published research that is claiming to study the connection between social media use and something like depression and anxiety. Only 6% of those studies actually included clinically depressed or anxious kids. So this is an overlooked group that that deserve a little bit more looking if we're going to make claims about the impact of something like social media on depression.
Yeah, they're invisible. That's what I use a lot of, this term of invisibility. But this also reminds me of some of the interventions that we've taken over the years when it comes to tech companies and features. So I want to kind of return to that because I think this audience is quite interested in then what then do we do to make sure the technology itself is attentive to some of these ebbs and flows that come out of the report and then what we're hearing. I'll start. Now, Jen, I could go to you. I know you work for a tech company. And I'm sure you all will be able to find out everything that Google is doing. But top of mind, what are some of the technical tools and advice that we've been giving to companies like Google and others to actually make sure we address these needs?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of protections already in place that we have, and we're really industry leading in that way. And when we know someone is, and when we know the age of a young person, a minor, they are given a different kind of experience with certain things turned on and certain things turned off already. So I think there's definitely pieces to that. I think there's also ways that we're promoting higher quality content. Our teacher approved program, for example, on the Play Store has a lot of really good enriching content, and we highlight good things. And I think we're looking at ways to promote the good and direct young people to things that would be joyful and educational and wonderful. And so I think there are tools and they're getting better. And I think we're always thinking of ways that we can make that experience even better.
Emily, what about you? What are some of your advice to developers and technologists on this?
I think one of the things that we see so clearly is that sometimes a design feature is taken up or experienced by young people in ways that we didn't expect. And it's hard for us to know from sometimes we might know from user data, but if we don't have young people at the table with us for conversations, we are left doing a lot of guessing. And I remember sitting down, and I know Amanda and I have both been really interested in this experience of being left on red. Because if you talk to teens, that is a big experience. Now, we were just saying some teens are calling it being left on scene. You can probably think through the design changes of the linguistic shift, but the basic idea of being a teenager, and you see that your message from your friend has been read, and you start thinking, do they hate me? Did I say the wrong thing? Are we not friends anymore? And you can go in this kind of anxious thinking spiral. And this is so interesting because the design feature did not create that kind of tendency to wonder what other people are thinking, that mind reading, cognitive distortion, but it's really amplifying it. And that has to do with the collision of a design feature and a developmental sensitivity. And it would be easy for us to think, because our experience maybe as adults is, oh, that's helpful because now I know that Jen read my message. She's probably just in transit. But we need to be having conversations so we understand, oh, this feature is actually generating a lot of stress for young people. What do we make of that? And is it actually generating more stress than good? I mean, how do we think about the downsides and the upsides of a new feature? So I think a call to action to just invite young people into the conversation, be in conversation and in collaboration with them, and be looking for the ways that a feature might be experienced in ways that are backfiring or having an unintended impact. And then I think, of course, we have to empower the people who are advocating for those changes within the company to really be able to implement them. So when you have a kids and families team or a trust and safety team advocating, this is something we're hearing from young people. We have to talk about this. We need to make sure that their voices are being heard and taken very seriously. And I think that the call to action we all feel around digital well-being will hopefully put some oomph and momentum behind that.
Yeah, no, I think that's so interesting. As a sociologist, we as academics constantly struggle with human subject concerns and the extent to which you can actually get young people to the table. I know in my work, it's always hard to sort of have these conversations as the middle-aged adult, right? Without having a young person sitting there validating those concerns. So I hope everybody's hearing this, right? Some of these design implications actually act out differently or behave differently than we intended them for. And the more we can actually do research that's more inclusive of younger people's voices, it could be interesting, right, for tech companies. But I'm not sure if we could do that, right?
Right, well, I'm just thinking, when I was 15 years old and had a boyfriend who didn't call me back, and I wrote a song, Allergic to the Phone.
You don't have to be 15
I mean,
you don't have to be 15 and not have a boyfriend call you back.
Right, and I was like, and so,
And it feels so bad.
It feels bad, right, but it's the same kind of thing. It's like back then, we would just wait and go, did the answering machine break? Did he not call me? Like, is he gonna call me? And then you'd stay at home because you couldn't leave the house.
Did you hear Jen say the answering machine?
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, I mean, I totally hear you, and there's definitely things that we can do feature-wise but there also is a part of just being a young person, and no matter what generation we're born in, that we are still going through it if people don't behave exactly the way they want to. And same for adults as well. So, I mean, I think that's a great example of a feature and what it does and how we're using it, but I also think it's just analogous to that not getting a phone call returned and not knowing if someone's calling you back and why they haven't. So I think it's always a little bit of like, how can we help people navigate these feelings? How can we make features that support it, but also understand that it is trying to understand just young people in general and how to support them the best we can.
And Amanda, jump in.
Yeah, I just wonder if I could add. So I totally agree with both of your points. I wonder if an area that needs more attention is not just these instances online that have this increased ambiguity, this increased uncertainty, like being left unread, which is so aversive to everyone, especially young people. And of course, that existed before the internet. I wonder if what is important is the relative shift in ambiguity online. So for example, there are instances where you have way less information about what somebody is thinking and feeling online, like when they leave you unread. But there are other instances where you have much more information. You have literally quantified information about how somebody feels about you. And I think that balance, that shift, which might be like more confusion about what people are thinking and feeling and less confusion or like less ambiguity about your social status or how you relate to people, that shift could be something that's really important to look at, and selfishly, because that's what I study.
Well, and I think that's why the report really embraces digital well-being, right? It's no longer around digital interaction, but it's about digital well-being because it has a compilation of all these factors. Okay, I did promise I was going to go to Q&A, so I'm time correcting myself. Are there any questions in the audience? Okay, we do have one, because I was prepared to keep going. So we get a microphone to the middle, be great. I think I saw someone with a microphone earlier. Perfect. You got it? Okay, thank you. And say your name so everybody knows who you are.
Hi, Denise Taylor with Privo. Thank you. So I'm wondering, are we really talking about just teens here? Has the research taken into consideration the vast number of 11 and 12-year-olds who have fibbed that they're 13 or 18? So are we really covering the bases?
Anybody want to answer?
Sorry, can you clarify? Is the question?
Should we go lower? Like, so we're really talking about teens, or are we really talking about
I can-
preteens and others?
I can speak a little bit about that. There is quite a lot of research looking at that younger age group as well, and some evidence that there are these sort of windows of sensitivity to something like social media use that are different for boys and girls and occur earlier, as you're describing, for girls. So I think it's 11 to 13 for girls and 14 and 15 for boys. During those time windows, it seems like the relationship, even though that relationship is weak, and I can talk more about that, it's quite weak, it's stronger in those windows. So I think you're right. I think there's something to do with perhaps pubertal stage, or?
I would just say that it's greater than 60% of kids have all lied about their age. So
Right.
when we're talking about teens in distress, are we really talking about teens, or are we talking about 10, 11, 12-year-olds masking the raving around this teen and adults? And so how is that skewing this research?
Yeah. It's hard to tell. I mean, that goes back to the question that we just talked about in terms of getting really genuine data from young people and also accepting some of the assumptions that the research methodology provides, right? So you assume you're talking to teens, but I think that's a further research question, the extent to which, young people are being also ambivalent in their age that may skew some of the results, or it may speak to that formative development is happening much sooner than what the report might suggest.
I didn't run this study, so I don't know. I just am a reader of the methods section, but my sense is that this was a survey that did not include that population. So I think actually the risk here is not that we have incorrectly included younger, but actually that we're missing the voices and perspectives of that population in this particular study.
Exactly.
So I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, I love that question.
could be wrong,
We do have a question in waiting on what further research needs to be done, and that might actually be the next step of this. Before we keep going, any other questions from the audience? Oh, we got one over here. Thank you. This is amazing because this is a big group. I wasn't sure how many questions we were going to get.
Hi, thank you for the presentation and the discussion. My name is Pasita Rada, I'm with Wikimedia. I was just curious about the relationship between the parents and the kids. Was there any kind of attachment methods that were conducted with that? And also, I was also totally separately wondering about bullying. Was that ever really delved into in this research as well?
Anybody want to respond on that? Now, again, just we didn't write the report. We're responding as external researchers, but would love to hear if anyone nuanced that data with regards to that question. Relationship between parents and kids, or maybe stuff that you actually study as well, be very helpful.
I had a similar question when I was reading the report. I didn't see anything about attachment or or not only not just the attachment, but I think a really interesting question is, okay, you see that I think it was 60, we have these high percentages of parents saying that they're talking about digital well-being with their kids. But of course, we know the quality of those conversations varies so much, and the impacts are almost certainly linked to what's being covered and with what tone, because there is a huge difference, which you could conflate and just asking, have you talked to your kid about digital well-being? You end up with the person who's screaming at their kid about their cell phone, saying yeah, we talked about digital well-being.
I did talk with my kid
the person
about it,
who's yeah, I'm feeling so understood and seen by my mom. And I think about that so much because I had a teen in a session on Friday who was talking about having this shift in her relationship with her mom about tech, and how big of a difference it made in their relationship to change how they were talking about tech. She said basically, my mom is now seeing more eye to eye with me about what's hard for me and why. And the impact of that was spilling over to the relationship in the same way that we also know the relationship will spill over and inform the kind of quality of conversation. So I think you're asking the right question. I don't think we have the data from that in this report, and I think that is one of the critical areas for more research is how do we better understand what effective tech parenting looks like and how we help all parents get there.
Right. And I can. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jen.
Yeah. No. And I know a little bit more about the study. I was sort of with it as it grew, and there were instances. We didn't look at exactly at sort of this kind of parent does this. We will be sharing data in the coming months that sort of looks a little bit more at that. But they're watching some of the qualitative interviews, or just watching and just seeing in general how parents, not from this, but from in other ways, that it does very much matter the kind of relationship the parent has with the young person, and the young person's perception of their parent is fair and balanced, and if they have a good relationship. Here we didn't look at the dyadic relationships so much, but yes, it's totally going to be influenced, and the young person's ability to feel comfortable with their parent and telling them all about these things very much matters, the kind of interactions that the two of them have. So bullying was something that was a factor of some of the negatives, but it wasn't the number one thing, as I recall. I'll have to double check that, but
It was like
bullying was
4.
there, but the scams and the falling for it and that kind of thing, sleep came up as
Tech habits.
Tech habits, but yeah, bullying wasn't this wasn't a study that says bullying is the biggest issue.
May, did you want to chime in on this question?
I think I just echo back this idea that the relationship between a teen and their parent is going to move the needle so much more than something like their online experiences or the content they're seeing or even how long they're staying online. Something like relationship to your parent, whether or not you have enough money, whether you even eat breakfast. Eating breakfast, according to the data, has a much larger effect than the time you spend online in terms of your well-being. So yeah, really important questions that need more.
And we got to wrap up, but I just want to respond to your question just based on some data that I experienced in the Overtown community in Miami when it came to Black parents. There is a certain level, and I think this speaks to FOSI's annual investment in doing this type of research. We are seeing parents become much more mature, that their children do have a digital life. And so in speaking to 500 parents, they don't quite know what their kid is doing, but they're willing to talk about it. And I think for those of us in this room who are doing this work, that's a different shift when it comes to parental attachment, because maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we were talking about their parents were not talking to their kids about their digital lives. So we've got more research to do, ladies, and Steve, on parental attachment, and that's why you have wonderful researchers up here that are actually doing this, as well as some of the work on preteens. Can we give this panelist a round of applause?